Cold open, Boston. Leather cuts, hidden wire, Boston, summer of 2007. The roar of Harleys thundered across Taunton and Brockton, Massachusetts. Outlaws Motorcycle Club members gathered in their chapter clubhouses, completely unaware that among them rode a deadly infiltrator. His name to them was Scott Calloway, but his true identity was FBI Special Agent Scott Payne, wired and living dangerously undercover. For more than 2 years, Payne lived a treacherous double life, slipping deeper into a violent world where brotherhood mixed with cocaine deals, gun trafficking, and bloody rivalries. On July 31st, 2007, the operation that Payne helped orchestrate came crashing down like thunder. The FBI and local police executed devastating coordinated raids, seizing cocaine, marijuana, more than $100,000 in cash, and 18 firearms, including assault rifles. 15 Outlaws members and associates were arrested in Massachusetts alone, part of a crushing crackdown the FBI dubbed Operation Roadkill. This wasn't just another drug bust. It was the explosive culmination of one of the Boston Division's most audacious undercover missions, a case that exposed how the Outlaws ran their criminal business in New England, and revealed just how close an agent had to come to death to bring them down. Payne's cover wasn't improvised. According to his later case reviews and interviews, every single detail was precisely calibrated. The Harley-Davidson he rode, the way he dressed, the dive bars he frequented, even the regional accent he adopted when speaking. He studied the culture, the slang, and the violent rituals until Scott Calloway wasn't an act. It was a second skin that could save his life. New England's biker scene wasn't forgiving to outsiders. The Taunton and Brockton circles of the Outlaws were already paranoid and cautious, acutely aware of law enforcement heat from national cases. Getting accepted required more than just showing up. It meant earning credibility in a space where outsiders were either cops, feds, or enemies marked for death. Payne hung around, bought drinks, swapped road stories, and projected the kind of unshakable loyalty outlaw bikers demanded before they even considered you for prospecting. But his mission wasn't to play biker. His objective was razor sharp: get close enough for controlled buys, weapons transactions, and conversations that could be recorded without ever blowing cover. That meant maintaining a perfect balance, present enough to look committed, but not so eager that deadly suspicion crept in. In biker culture, overeagerness is a red flag that can get you killed. Payne had to prove himself without looking like he was trying to prove himself. Every handshake, every whiskey shared, every dangerous ride taken was part of the build. Slowly, Calloway became known, trusted, and accepted in outlaw spaces. And with each small acceptance, Payne was edging closer to the kind of evidence that could bring crushing indictments: guns, drugs, and the incriminating conversations that prosecutors love to put before a jury. One wrong word, and the Outlaws wouldn't just cast him out, they'd bury him. First doors open, Taunton and Brockton. For Scott Payne, building a legend was just the beginning. The real test came when he had to cross from outsider to hang-around. In outlaw motorcycle culture, this first step is everything. It's the razor-thin line between being a face at the bar and being someone the club starts to watch closely. In Taunton and Brockton, Massachusetts, the Outlaws maintained a tight-knit, paranoid presence. These weren't casual social clubs. They were watchful, suspicious, and under constant law enforcement pressure. New faces drew immediate suspicion. Payne's strategy wasn't to push. It was to let the club set the pace. He showed up at the same places, stayed consistent with his Calloway story, and let curiosity about him grow naturally. Eventually, the doors began to creak open. He was invited to rides, to clubhouse gatherings, and even to help with smaller runs. These weren't formal assignments, they were deadly tests. Could Calloway keep up on the road? Did he handle his liquor without losing his edge? Would he run his mouth too much about business? Each moment was a quiet evaluation, the Outlaws measuring whether this newcomer had the discipline and the grit to belong in their violent world. What Payne described later as crucial was slow-rolling the trust. Undercover work isn't about rushing in with offers or pushing for illegal deals. It's about deadly patience. The more natural the climb, the deeper the infiltration. So, Payne used classic tradecraft: minimal phones, Outlaws already distrusted constant texting or calls. Payne kept communications short, face-to-face whenever possible. Unshakable consistency. His backstory never shifted. Same job, same Harley, same background. Any crack in the story would have killed him. Letting the targets lead. Instead of forcing conversations, Payne let the Outlaws decide what to share and when. If they wanted to test him, he accepted the test. If they wanted silence, he didn't push. With every hang-around night, his access grew. One day it was beers at the bar. Another, it was being trusted enough to ride with patched members. Then, slowly, came time inside the clubhouse itself. That access was everything. Clubhouses are the sacred sanctuaries of outlaw life, where plans are made, deals are discussed, and lines of loyalty are drawn. To get inside meant he had already passed a gauntlet of unspoken tests. But each new step forward raised the stakes. More access meant more suspicion if anything felt off. For Payne, the deeper he went, the thinner the line between undercover agent and the brother he was pretending to be. Gathering proof, drugs, guns, and tapes. Once Payne had his foot inside the clubhouse doors, the mission shifted dangerously. It was no longer just about blending in. It was about building cases the courts couldn't ignore. For the FBI and DOJ, Operation Roadkill had clear objectives. Document the Outlaws' trafficking activities, tie members directly to narcotics and weapons, and seize enough evidence to dismantle the network. The Outlaws' criminal economy in New England revolved around two deadly mainstays: drugs and guns. Cocaine and marijuana were steady revenue streams, often moved in bulk and distributed through trusted circles. Firearms, meanwhile, were both tools of intimidation and trade commodities. Payne's role, carefully controlled and monitored, was to edge close enough to see these exchanges firsthand and record them. He carried concealed wired devices into conversations, logging hours of taped dialogue. Every deal, every coded phrase, every offhand admission became part of the record. And as the case grew, so did the deadly stakes. Transactions involving cocaine and marijuana were captured on tape, linking specific members to ongoing conspiracies. These weren't small-time buys, but conversations about quantity, supply lines, and trust. But the guns were what truly escalated everything. The firearms seized during the operation included handguns, shotguns, and even an AR-15 rifle, weapons of choice for both defense and intimidation. For prosecutors, that detail mattered. Firearms tied directly to drug trafficking offenses elevate charges, transforming what could have been mid-level distribution cases into federal felonies with heavy penalties. One major turning point came with the search of the Taunton clubhouse. Armed with warrants supported by Payne's undercover work, federal agents raided the Outlaws' base of operations. Inside, they found not just weapons, but also drug paraphernalia, financial evidence, and club materials that helped connect the dots between the men wearing the patches and the crimes they were committing. Roughly $100,000 in cash and assets were also recovered, a snapshot of the money flowing through the network. To the public, numbers like these, guns seized, cash counted, were just headlines. But to investigators, each item told a bigger story. The guns demonstrated access to firepower. The cash proved profitability. The tapes made the evidence stick. And when layered together, they painted a picture of an organization not just hanging around bars and riding Harleys, but actively moving narcotics and arming themselves for protection and power. Operation Roadkill was no longer just an infiltration. It had become a case file, thick with undeniable proof. But as Payne would later admit, the deeper the proof stacked up, the more dangerous the undercover game became. Because while the FBI was building evidence for trial, the Outlaws were building their trust in Scott Calloway, a trust that could turn lethal if it ever cracked. The Takedown, July 31st, 2007. By midsummer 2007, the FBI and their state partners had more than enough to act. Weeks of recordings, seized weapons, cash, and testimony built a case that was no longer just about surveillance. It was about dismantling the Outlaws' New England foothold before the violence escalated further. On July 31st, 2007, the operation shifted gears from infiltration to execution. Before dawn, FBI agents, Massachusetts State Police, and local departments fanned out in a series of coordinated raids across Taunton and Brockton. The targets weren't random. They were carefully identified through Payne's undercover work and weeks of surveillance. By the end of the day, 15 Outlaws members and associates were in custody, either under federal indictment or state-level complaint. The charges struck at the core of the gang's machinery: drug trafficking, weapons offenses, and conspiracy. Cocaine and marijuana distribution formed the backbone, but the weapons counts gave prosecutors the leverage to keep bonds high and sentences steep. The timing was no accident either. The Outlaws had been gaining ground in New England, muscling in on traditional biker strongholds and causing friction with rivals. For federal authorities, shutting down the Taunton and Brockton chapters was a way of cutting the legs out before the group could cement dominance in the region. But this wasn't just a Massachusetts story. The Department of Justice framed Operation Roadkill as part of a national strategy against the Outlaws Motorcycle Club. From 2007 to 2010, the DOJ, ATF, and FBI were waging parallel campaigns across the Midwest and Southeast, stacking indictments that accused the Outlaws of everything from racketeering and extortion to murder for hire. The Massachusetts arrests became one tile in a much larger mosaic of federal pressure: the target and the turf. To understand why Operation Roadkill sent shockwaves through the criminal underworld, you first need to know the ruthless club at the center of it all: the Outlaws Motorcycle Club, officially the American Outlaws Association, or AOA. Founded in 1935 in McCook, Illinois, the Outlaws predate even the notorious Hells Angels, making them one of the oldest and most established outlaw biker gangs in the world. Their motto cuts like a blade: God forgives, outlaws don't. Through the blood-soaked 1960s and 70s, the Outlaws spread like a virus across the Midwest and South, becoming a terrifying powerhouse of the 1% era biker scene. By the early 2000s, they weren't just a motorcycle club. They were a ruthless criminal enterprise, heavily involved in drug trafficking, extortion, and savage turf wars with rivals like the Hells Angels and Banditos. So, why did New England become a battlefield? By the mid-2000s, Massachusetts was seen as explosive contested ground. The Outlaws were aggressively trying to establish a permanent foothold, planting dangerous chapters in Taunton and Brockton, while the Hells Angels Boston chapter remained a dominant and violent presence. For law enforcement, this made the region a potential powder keg. If the Outlaws succeeded, it could trigger devastating open conflict. Operation Roadkill wasn't happening in isolation. Between 2007 and 2010, the Outlaws faced crushing national heat from federal agencies. The Department of Justice, ATF, and FBI were coordinating relentless pressure campaigns across the country. The most dramatic strike came in 2010, when a federal grand jury in the Eastern District of Virginia indicted 27 top Outlaws leaders, including then-National President Jack Rosga, on charges of racketeering, conspiracy, and violence in aid of organized crime. Those charges carried up to 20 years in prison, and the FBI described the Outlaws as a national criminal organization. Massachusetts wasn't central to that massive indictment, but it was part of the deadly web of related searches and arrests that tied local chapters to the larger national criminal picture. Roadkill was both a devastating regional hit and a crucial piece of the bigger federal puzzle, designed to choke the Outlaws' expansion before it destabilized New England's already explosive biker underworld. Building the legend: Scott Calloway. Undercover operations don't succeed without a bulletproof legend. For Special Agent Scott Payne, that legend was Scott Calloway, a Harley-riding, whiskey-drinking drifter who fit seamlessly into the Outlaws' dangerous world. Payne didn't just put on leather and grow a beard. He carefully crafted a backstory durable enough to withstand deadly scrutiny. Calloway was from Texas, a man who worked as a site survey specialist, a conveniently vague trade that explained why he could vanish for days, had cash on hand, and moved easily between states. He was always on the road, always working a job. This kind of occupation was perfect for an outlaw club prospect. It made sense, it didn't raise suspicions, and it gave him the flexibility he needed as an FBI agent to come and go without triggering alarm. Then came the drug weights. Packages of cocaine and marijuana were carefully logged, photographed, and tested, with lab reports entered into evidence. Each gram was quantified, giving prosecutors a concrete measure to apply sentencing guidelines. Alongside the narcotics were the weapons, cataloged with serial numbers, ownership links, and the circumstances of recovery. The government also used roll charts, visual maps of the Outlaws Massachusetts network. At the top sat chapter officers. Beneath them, prospects and associates. These charts weren't artistic flourishes, they were trial tools, built from Payne's intelligence. They helped jurors understand hierarchy, chain of command, and the difference between someone casually present in a clubhouse versus someone orchestrating deals. The success of that package hinged on one key element: maintaining cover. Scott Payne's alter ego had to survive for months without cracks. If his cover had failed, the chain of evidence would have collapsed. More importantly, Payne had to be physically present during incriminating acts. An audio recording is powerful, but an agent's testimony that he personally saw the drugs, handled the guns, or exchanged the cash cements the case in court. His debriefs stress this. The recordings captured voices, but his presence gave those voices context and credibility. That's why, in the final files, you don't just see seized contraband. You see an undercover woven into the narrative, sitting across from the accused, blending into the outlaw world, while quietly building the government's case brick by brick, from arrests to guilty pleas. The weight of the Operation Roadkill case came crashing down in federal court by late 2008. On October 21, 2008, prosecutors secured their most significant win. Timothy Sylvia, the former president of the Brockton Outlaws chapter, pleaded guilty to conspiracy to distribute more than 5 kilograms of cocaine. That volume, 5 kilos or more, wasn't symbolic. Under federal guidelines, it meant a mandatory minimum of 10 years and the possibility of decades. Sylvia admitted in open court that, as president, he coordinated deals and oversaw the flow of cocaine through his circle. The undercover buys and surveillance tied him directly to the enterprise. For prosecutors, it validated the entire undercover strategy, proving that Payne's months of careful infiltration had reached the top of a local chapter. The hammer fell even harder in sentencing. On August 28, 2009, Sylvia stood before a federal judge and was given 262 months in prison, nearly 22 years behind bars. Alongside him, co-defendant Todd D'Onofrio received a 120-month sentence, or 10 years, for his role in the same cocaine conspiracy. Both men's names are etched into the FBI's archived releases as central figures taken down by Roadkill. What made this so pivotal wasn't just the sentences, it was the precedent. The Outlaws' Massachusetts presence had been formally tied, in federal court, to large-scale drug trafficking, not just brawls or intimidation. For federal authorities, it was evidence that their strategy of embedding an undercover agent in local biker circles could work, and it set the stage for larger operations to come. Parallel heat, national indictments, local searches. While Massachusetts cases worked their way through court, the Outlaws as a whole were facing fire on a broader front. On June 15, 2010, the Department of Justice announced a sweeping indictment out of the Eastern District of Virginia, EDVA. 27 outlaws, including senior leadership, were charged under RICO statutes with crimes ranging from attempted murder to drug trafficking. This wasn't an isolated prosecution. It was the federal government signaling that the outlaws were in their crosshairs nationwide. The indictment described the group as an organized criminal enterprise, capable of orchestrating violence, including shootings tied to its feud with the Hells Angels. On the same day those Virginia indictments dropped, FBI agents and state troopers were active in Massachusetts too. Federal search warrants were executed in Bridgewater, Abington, and Brockton, targeting outlaws-linked properties. For investigators, it demonstrated that Operation Roadkill wasn't a standalone probe. It was a piece of a multi-state squeeze. By pairing local prosecutions like Sylvia's with national racketeering cases, DOJ created a two-tiered strategy. Massachusetts defendants faced direct drug and weapons charges, while leadership elsewhere was hit with enterprise-level allegations. For the outlaws, it meant pressure from both ends: street-level disruption in New England and organizational disruption across the country. This parallel heat showed how Operation Roadkill fit into a wider narrative. Not just a single chapter brought down, but part of the government's attempt to fracture a club they branded as one of the Big Four outlaw motorcycle gangs. Undercover risk, almost burned. Working undercover inside an outlaw motorcycle club was never routine, and Payne has since admitted that Operation Roadkill carried moments where his cover almost collapsed. In interviews and debriefs, he recalls situations where one wrong answer, or one nervous glance, could have ended in violence. Weapons checks were a constant threat. Members frequently carried firearms, and in some instances, Payne was patted down before entering a clubhouse or during late-night gatherings. One slip, such as accidentally bringing in FBI recording gear in the wrong pocket, could have blown months of infiltration. On other occasions, Outlaws members would launch into sudden tests. Questions about his past, about runs he claimed to have been on, or about friends in the biker scene. These were casual on the surface, but designed to probe the depth of his story. If he hesitated or contradicted himself, suspicion could spread fast. Even more dangerous were the unpredictable bursts of violence. Payne has described the atmosphere as one where fights could break out over small insults, and loyalty was proven through participation. Being present meant he had to balance showing enough toughness to be accepted, without escalating situations that could spiral into bloodshed. For an undercover agent, violence wasn't just background noise. It was a potential flashpoint that could expose his true role. From these experiences, Payne later emphasized key lessons in undercover tradecraft. First, the importance of authentic detail. His Scott Calloway persona was built with layers of believable background, from the kind of Harley he rode to the regional mannerisms he adopted. Second, the balance between making buys and staying safe. Agents can't push too hard for evidence, or targets grow suspicious, but holding back too much risks losing relevance in the crew. Finally, the psychological strain. Living the role day in and day out, surrounded by armed men who would retaliate brutally if they discovered the truth, takes a toll few outside law enforcement can fully grasp. Operation Roadkill wasn't just about gathering evidence. It was about surviving long enough in hostile territory to bring the case home. What stuck in court, and why. When the dust settled, Operation Roadkill didn't try to put the entire Outlaws motorcycle club on trial at once. Instead, federal prosecutors in Massachusetts followed a very deliberate strategy. They focused tightly on what could be proven beyond reasonable doubt: specific drug transactions, weapons possession, and the individuals who were directly recorded or witnessed committing those crimes. This tactical focus stood in sharp contrast to other biker mega cases in the same era. Federal indictments against the Mongols and even earlier Hells Angels trials had sometimes collapsed because they cast the net too wide, charging dozens of people in sprawling conspiracies without airtight, individualized evidence. Judges often trimmed those cases back, juries got lost in the complexity, and defense attorneys argued that the government was criminalizing the culture, not just the crimes. But in Roadkill, the FBI and DOJ had undercover buys on tape, cash recovered in controlled stings, and drug weights verified in the lab. They also had weapons tied directly to trafficking and clubhouse searches that yielded more evidence. Chains of custody were clean, and Payne's testimony as an undercover officer was firsthand, not hearsay. The results showed up in the sentencing phase. Timothy Sylvia's guilty plea to conspiring to distribute more than 5 kilograms of cocaine and his subsequent 262-month sentence underscored how the government zeroed in on core narcotics activity. These weren't symbolic busts. They were career-ending convictions that took major figures off the street. In short, what stuck in the court was what could be documented, recorded, and traced, not generalized claims about outlaw biker culture. That careful design is why Roadkill avoided the overreach that had sunk other prosecutions. Final takeaway: how you flip a fortress operation. Roadkill became more than just another FBI case file. It's now studied as a teaching example inside law enforcement circles of how to penetrate a closed, violent organization and bring it down surgically. The Boston Division's blueprint was simple in theory, but demanding in practice. Embed an undercover who could ride, talk, and live the part. document evidence patiently over time without rushing, and then dismantle the structure with a series of focused, defensible charges. Rather than declare war on the entire Outlaws MC, they chipped away at the Brockton and Taunton chapters with precision strikes. For Agent Scott Payne, the experience became a career-defining story. His Scott Calloway legend showed the importance of authenticity in undercover work, maintaining detailed cover and an ability to endure constant threats without breaking character. For the public, Operation Roadkill remains one of the rare windows into how a secretive 1% motorcycle club operated in New England, and how one agent, living a double life, helped flip that fortress from the inside out.